Across this continent, there are places Aboriginal communities have been warning outsiders about, protecting and quietly explaining for tens of thousands of years, long before a single scientist arrived with a clipboard and a dating kit. What's genuinely rare is how often, when researchers finally do the work properly, the evidence lines up with what the traditional custodians were saying the entire time. These are 11 of those places, and in almost every case, the science hasn't closed the mystery. It's confirmed it's real. Number 1, Uluru. Rising 348 metres out of flat desert in the Northern Territory, Uluru is sacred to the Anangu people as the site of ancestral Chukurpa stories tracing the actions of creator beings across the landscape. Geologically, it's a single continuous slab of Arcos sandstone extending an estimated 2.5 kilometres underground, meaning the visible rock is only a small fraction of a formation that's been eroding at the surface for over 600 million years. The Anangu closed the site to climbers permanently in 2019, ending a decades-long dispute. And while geologists can explain the rock's composition and age with confidence, they still can't fully explain why this specific formation eroded into such a distinct, isolated monolith, while everything around it wore away completely. Number 2, Kata Tjuta. 30 kilometres from Uluru sit the 36 domes of Kata Tjuta, sacred to Anangu men's law and considered even more restricted than Uluru itself, with large sections of the site's specific ceremonial meaning never shared publicly with outsiders under any circumstances. Geologically, the domes are made of conglomerate rock, a mix of compressed gravel, pebbles, and boulders rather than the single sandstone slab that makes up Uluru, despite both formations rising from the same ancient seabed. Why two such different rock structures formed so close together from the same original basin remains an active point of geological discussion. Number 3, Wollumbin, Mount Warning. The eroded remnant of an enormous shield volcano in northern New South Wales, Wollumbin holds deep significance to the Bundjalung people and is, due to its geographic position, genuinely the first point on the Australian mainland to receive sunrise each day. Traditional law restricts who may climb the summit, tied to specific ceremonial protocols, and in 2022, a formal decision permanently closed public climbing access after years of documented conflict between the Bundjalung custodians and visitors determined to reach the top regardless of the restriction. Geologists confirm the mountain is the deeply eroded core of a volcano active over 20 million years ago. But the specific reasons this particular peak eroded into such a jagged, dramatic silhouette compared to other extinct volcanic remnants nearby remain only partially understood. 4. Ngarrabullgan, Mount Mulligan. 10 times the size of Uluru, this Queensland tabletop mountain contains the oldest confirmed Aboriginal archaeological sites in the state, with occupation stretching back more than 37,000 years. Around 600 years ago, that occupation stopped abruptly, with no environmental explanation to account for it. Jungan tradition holds that a malevolent spirit named Iku inhabits the summit, and the timing of that belief lines up almost exactly with the archaeological gap. one of the rare documented cases where oral tradition and physical evidence agree on both the event and its rough date. 5. Kalkajaka Black Mountain. A field of enormous black granite boulders in far north Queensland, sacred to the Kuku Yalanji people, who maintain specific warnings about entering the boulder field itself. More than a dozen documented disappearances have occurred at the site since the 1870s, several of experienced searchers who vanished during active search operations for earlier missing persons. Geologists have documented the site's dangerous internal cave network, thermal variation, and the way its black stone absorbs and radiates heat differently than the surrounding landscape. But no comprehensive explanation has ever accounted for the specific pattern and frequency of disappearances recorded there. Number 6, Karlu Karlu, Devil's Marbles. Scattered across a stretch of Northern Territory desert, Karlu Karlu is a field of enormous round granite boulders, some balanced so precisely on narrow points of contact that they appear to defy their own weight. To the Warramungu people, the boulders are the eggs of the rainbow serpent. Geologists broadly attribute the rounding to a process called spheroidal weathering, in which buried granite blocks erode evenly along their edges over millions of years. What the process doesn't fully explain is why this specific site produced such extreme, precise balancing compared to other granite formations undergoing the exact same weathering process elsewhere on the continent. 7. Wolfe Creek Crater. One of the best preserved meteorite impact craters on Earth, sitting in the Western Australian desert, formed roughly 120,000 years ago. The Jaru people call it Kandimalal and describe it in oral tradition as the site of a fallen star, a description that predates the crater's formal scientific identification from the air in 1947 by an unknown but clearly enormous span of time. The crater remains geologically significant, specifically because its structure is so well preserved despite its age. And researchers still debate exactly how much of the original rim and ejected material has eroded away versus what remains from the original impact. Number 8, Budj Bim. A network of stone channels, weirs and traps built by the Gunditjmara people in Victoria to farm eels, confirmed through radiocarbon and other dating methods at a minimum of 6,600 years old, making it one of the oldest known aquaculture systems anywhere on Earth, older than the pyramids or Stonehenge. Added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2019, Budj Bim is fully verified, not disputed, yet remains comparatively unknown internationally, despite the scale of what its dating actually represents for the history of human engineering. 9. The Kimberley Rock Art. Scattered across remote gorges in Western Australia, the Gwion figures, sometimes called Bradshaw paintings, are among the oldest and most stylistically distinct rock art found anywhere on the continent. Painted in a fine, detailed style, unlike anything found before or after in the broader regional record, the painting's origin, meaning, and the reason for their sudden stylistic appearance and disappearance remain genuinely unresolved among researchers, despite decades of dedicated study. A dry lakebed in far western New South Wales, where the remains of Mungo Lady and Mungo Man, found in 1968 and 1974, pushed the confirmed length of Aboriginal occupation in Australia back to at least 40,000 years, following a dating dispute that ran for nearly 3 decades before a 2003 study settled on a widely accepted figure for the Paarkantji, Muthi Muthi and Ngiyampa peoples connected to the site. The confirmation of such deep occupation was never really news, simply a number outsiders needed in order to accept what their communities had always known. Number 11, Boulia's Channel Country, home to the Min Min lights, a phenomenon reported since well before European settlement gave the area its modern name. In 2003, neuroscientist Jack Pettigrew published research proposing the lights are a fata morgana, an inverted mirage caused by distant light sources bending over the horizon through layered desert air. His model explains a significant number of reported sightings, particularly those involving vehicles and distant artificial light sources. But even Pettigrew acknowledged the explanation doesn't fully account for the earliest pre-automobile reports, leaving the phenomenon scientifically explained in general terms, but not entirely closed as a case. What connects all 11? Look across these 11 sites and a pattern becomes obvious fast. In nearly every case, Aboriginal communities describe these places accurately, sometimes with startling precision, long before any formal scientific investigation ever took place. Wolfe Creek was called a fallen star before anyone dated the impact. Ngarrabullgan's abandonment lines up with when Jungan tradition says the mountain became dangerous. Lake Mungo's 40,000-year timeline was, to the traditional custodians, simply confirmation of something they'd never needed to question. What's genuinely rare and worth sitting with is how often the scientific explanation and the traditional account aren't actually in competition with each other at all. Pettigrew's mirage model doesn't erase the Min Min lights. It explains the physical mechanism behind an experience people have been having for well over a century. The spheroidal weathering process behind Karlu doesn't reduce the rainbow serpent story. It describes the same rocks from a different angle entirely. Budj Bim's radiocarbon dates don't replace the Gunditjmara's own understanding of their aquaculture system's age. They simply confirm, using an entirely separate method, what was already known. Why the mystery doesn't actually close. None of this means every question gets answered. Black Mountain's disappearances still don't have a single accepted mechanism covering every documented case. The Kimberley's Guion paintings still have no agreed origin story among researchers. Devil's Marble's extreme balancing still isn't fully explained by the general weathering process that accounts for rounding elsewhere. Even Pettigrew's own Min Min research left a gap for the oldest reports his model couldn't cleanly cover. That's really the through line connecting all 11 sites. Science, applied carefully and honestly, tends to confirm that something real is happening at each of these places, rather than dismissing the traditional account as myth to be politely retired. But confirming that something happened isn't the same as explaining every detail of how or why. And in site after site across this continent, researchers doing the most careful, rigorous work available keep landing in the same place, certain enough to say this is real, and honest enough to admit they don't have the whole picture yet. What's actually being protected? It's worth being clear about something these 11 sites all share beyond their mysteries. Every one of them remains actively significant to a living community today, not a relic of a culture that's disappeared. The Anangu still hold ceremony connected to Uluru and Kata Tjuta. The Bundjalung still restrict access to Wollumbin's summit. The Jungans still avoid overnight camping on Ngarrabullgan. The Kuku Yalanji still warn visitors away from parts of Kalkajaka. These aren't stories being preserved in a museum somewhere. They're active, ongoing relationships between specific communities and specific pieces of country, carried forward across thousands of years, and in most cases, still being carried forward exactly the same way today. What science has added to that relationship, at its best, isn't a correction. It's a second, independent line of evidence arriving from an entirely different direction and finding again and again across this continent that the oldest stories being told about this land were paying much closer attention than anyone gave them credit for.